last couple of weeks.
Yeah, great, thank you. Hello, everyone. So tonight, our agenda, we're going to briefly recap what we've been hearing from you all over the last couple of weeks, and then we will share with you some initial drawings and ideas that we've started to work on, and then we will have, as Victor mentioned, a chance for you all to tell us via text message through the polling what you think about it. Also, feel free, as Victor said, anytime to put questions in the Q&A. For those of you who haven't joined us for previous meetings, this process is looking at the neighborhoods of Glenwood, Millville, and St. Andrews. And so you can see on this map here, the areas in purple. So they're really large areas, really larger than a single neighborhood. You can see here, tonight we're starting to think, what is possible? What is possible for the future of these neighborhoods? How do you want to grow? What kinds of open spaces? What kinds of streets do you want to have? And that's what our conversation tonight is going to be about. So again, a brief schedule of the events over the last couple weeks. We had last week input sessions for each neighborhood, starting with Glenwood on last Monday night, the 15th. Then we had a session for Millville, followed by St. Andrews. So those first three boxes. Then this week, our team has been taking all the ideas and starting to create illustrations and plan ideas. And while we were doing that, we invited folks to check back in with us at our virtual studio. So we had lots of Zoom sessions and folks dropping in and hearing. And then tonight, the work in progress. So this is definitely not the end, but it's the end of this week's work. So for those who weren't able to join us, at the sessions last week, we had really great participation. We had over 100 folks come out for Monday night on the 15th, and then around 90 people each time for Millville and St. Andrews. So really great to see all the faces, even though we couldn't see you in person, to see you through the computer screen and listen to your ideas. And what we did, we had an initial presentation, and then we broke into small groups, like you see here. And we did some brainstorming. We had maps, and we marked up the maps with the ideas that folks had for the future. And we asked them, what kinds of streets would you like to see? What kinds of buildings in the future? And what things would you like to see to strengthen and improve your neighborhoods? Then this week, here's some images from what we call Design Week. So we took, again, all these ideas and started to create some drawings, and we had some additional Zoom sessions where we shared our screen and showed folks what we were working on and got some additional feedback. And that's led us to tonight. So you may ask, what were some of the things we've been hearing? This is a long list. I don't expect you all to read it right now, but we will post this online so you can go back and read it later. But these are some of the things that we've been hearing. So for example, for the Glenwood neighborhood, lots of ideas about Martin Luther King Boulevard and infilling vacant parcels, improving streets, improving safety, wanting a grocery store. And as we heard all these ideas, we started to mark them on the map. So you see the map on the right-hand side here, just kind of identify some key spots that folks over and over again were identifying. So we have similar lists for Millville. Again, ideas for street improvements on 3rd Street and Highway 98. Ideas for having small commercial corner stores or centers within the neighborhood. Access to a grocery store, again, came up over and over again. And ideas about having infill compatible with the historic integrity of the neighborhood. St. Andrews, similar types of themes came up, ideas about bike paths and connecting to downtown, ideas for Beck Avenue and wanting to make that a city-owned street so that we could redesign it to be more pedestrian oriented, and water access are three of the biggest things that came up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Victor, and he's going to walk through how we've been taking these ideas and starting to create some illustrations.
Thank you, Amy. Those of you who know me, because we've worked, Amy and I have worked along with a lot of members of this team on the downtown plan over the last year. And you've probably heard me say this before, but we have to wonder, where do the fine cities come from? The places where people love to be, that are economically vital, that People go out of their way to enjoy, just to be there. They have buoyant tax base and so on. Where do they come from? Where does that come from? And the answer is, it doesn't really come from Santa Claus or from the Easter Bunny or as a gift from out of nowhere. It comes because people take time to do what you did over the last couple of weeks, and out of their busy lives, and draw lines on a map and say, let's do it like this, or out of the 3 choices, we like this one the best. And they make decisions and decide what they want to be when they grow up. And that's what the founders in Panama City did when they laid out the original layout of the town. That's what the founders of Millville and St. Andrews did. It's when they extended the street network out to form Glenwood and to grow these areas together. That's what they were doing. And so you're really just kind of picking up the same pencil and continuing that process. And part of it is about setting the ambition high and saying, we don't want just to be just good enough. We want some of the things to be so good they're great, and that they stand out as reasons someone choosing where to live would choose these neighborhoods in Panama City, or someone who grew up there would say, this is so much better now than it was when we were younger. And the key ingredients are actually physical things, like the neighborhoods themselves and the streets that interconnect them and bind them together, and the parks and open spaces that not only shape them and frame them and provide nice places to be when you need a little green relief, or to be seen across long views across open space, but also green spaces that help you withstand storms, that bring a lot of storm water, or that keep your bay healthy. And so those are the ingredients. And so what we tried to do in the work we're going to show you tonight is show how that attitude towards city building would play out in these neighborhoods, at least in theory. Now, let me say this. An energetic group of enthusiastic people stayed up really late over the last 9 days or so, and put this initial presentation together as a draft to show you and see if you think it's on the right track. But it's just that. It's just a draft. In fact, many of the things we're going to show you tonight, your city commissioners, your city manager, your planning staff, they haven't seen yet. We just drew it. I mean, we're literally drawing. The presentation you're seeing was saved at 6:34 p.m. Eastern time, and just before tonight's presentation. It's just a draft. So we're going to show it to you, get your feedback on it, then go work on it and correct it, add what's missing, fix what's wrong. In a way, you members of the public are getting a transparent briefing about this at the same time as your elected officials and the key members of city staff and other agency participants who have joined in tonight. So just remember that word draft. Now, just like in the downtown plan, we use a big map as a kind of bulletin board for all the ideas. And as things came up or an idea took shape or was described, we put that on the map. And so we made these illustrative plans that start with the existing conditions, all the existing houses, lots, buildings, parking lots, parks, and what have you. And then we added on to it the things that could grow over the coming generation under the ideas of the plan. And there's an illustrative plan for Glenwood, one for Millville, and one for St. Andrews that do that same exact thing. And we've been layering information up on top of that, in addition to like where infill development could take place to make the neighborhood more complete, or a street could go from no trees to tree lined. We've also illustrated ways that the park system, that emerald and sapphire necklace of green and blue, can be expanded and connected across these 3 areas. So the illustrative plan is kind of a place for us to keep track of how all these ideas would work out in real space. Now, remember we've talked a little bit about what neighborhoods are, and a neighborhood is not just a subdivision or a shopping center or an office park. A neighborhood is, when we use the term neighborhood in city planning, we're talking about something that's more complete than that. And they have 5 basic characteristics: the definable, legible center, and often a very legible edge. They're limited in size to about 5 minutes walk from center to edge. That's a rule of thumb that planners use. Doesn't mean that neighborhoods are exactly circular, but you can see 5 minutes walk is the radius of the circles that were laid down on the map here to give you a sense of scale. And you immediately discover that these 3 areas are each, in all 3 of them, they're enormous. In fact, there are many neighborhoods there. So that approach is working in our work to build up a map of this city of great neighborhoods. The centers probably matter more than the edges, and the biggest and most important neighborhood of them all is the downtown. That's where we started last year. But the surrounding areas, like Glenwood and Millville and St. Andrews, have centers of their own that are kind of like the secondary centers of the city, not as big, not as complete as downtown itself, but neighborhood commercial and places to work and places to gather can be found at the centers of these neighborhoods. So we worked with folks over the last few days to figure out where those things occur on the map. So here's an existing conditions map of Glenwood, and then this map will change, and you'll see superimposing on it some hypotheticals, like what if 11th Street is really made a signature corridor of confidence and beauty, really, in the city, and made more convenient for people who are moving east and west, whether they're driving or they are walking, biking, or someday using transit. MLK is similar. It's an incomplete work of civic art, let's say, that needs a little TLC to heal from the trauma of the road widening some time back. But now it has grown to a point of significance. When it meets 11th and when it meets 15th, those are places for centers in Glenwood. There's a lot of land there, and we will be zooming in on this map to show what those kind of centers could be like. And then the last layer, you see a green layer we put on top that shows existing parks and potential areas for preserve or restoration or limited development or interconnecting, both following the path of stormwater for obvious reasons in our low-lying coastal communities, but also following the natural lines that people want to move through trails, and birds and pollinators want to fly. So let's just look for a second at probably the most important intersection in Glenwood. And here's a what if for your consideration. In this picture, the top of the screen is west and the left of your screen is south. And you're looking at the intersection where MLK Boulevard intersects with 15th Street. And as you know, this photograph, of course, is before the storm, so it illustrates the trees at their more mature stage than we see today. But and there are some buildings in these areas. There are also a lot of vacant lots, and there's a great deal of government-owned land in here that could be used as a kind of catalyst for future growth. People asked for a grocery store. They said, how can we have a grocery store in these neighborhoods, a supermarket? Can we find a way to fit one in? Right along 15th might be a natural place to do it. So at first we started sketching. This is James Doherty's first freehand sketch on top of the photograph, just kind of illustrating the idea that one could add new buildings and add green spaces and flesh out with urban form, really, the streets that have a lot of vacant lots on them now. And then we brought to him all sorts of challenges, like how do we fit a hotel in that? How do we add a supermarket to that? Where's the parking? And here's a more advanced version of the drawing. Mark McQueen, city manager, I'll acknowledge that when we showed you this drawing just 3 hours ago, there wasn't any color on it, and it was far less detailed than what you see right now. And that's the just-in-time inking that we have been doing all afternoon in these pictures. So I just let them all know that you're seeing this for the first time as well. But at the top of the drawing, you see near 15th, you see a site for a supermarket, generous areas for bin-bought parking, but not necessarily the big shopping center kind of style, more like a supermarket that would fit into a neighborhood. And then there's a new square right at the intersection. You can, if you're looking really close in your screen, you can probably make out the Welcome to Glenwood sign that gives community identity. And then that's paired up with an actual public square, streets with street-oriented buildings. You can see the buildings along MLK are set back a little bit to make room for a significant tree line, so that over time that boulevard could be more like a parkway. Folks asked for a multi-user trail to run parallel to MLK, and that's one of the places you can go. Backstage of everything I just described, in the upper left part of your drawing, what you're seeing is infill housing of various scales, missing middle housing, they like to call it. So not just big single family detached houses, although there could be some of those, but also small apartment buildings and attached row houses, which are possible to deliver with a lower cost, and cottages in a cottage court kind of format, or bungalows, less expensive, easier to construct. This would be a great place for an Academy of the Building Arts to go to town, building one front porch cottage after another, teaching people how to do that construction and generating the housing that's badly needed here, while adding neighbors close to the commercial things that you see in this picture. So that's the first what if. Now you'll notice the upper right hand corner says draft. This will probably change over the summer as we think about it more. Here's a first line art sketch of what in a future vision this might mature to become. Now across the street, there's a site for the MLK Rec Center to become the MLK Community Center. And what's illustrated here in the upper right-hand corner of your screen is the city's sketch drawing of a possible layout for this important civic building and how it would sit into its site with the plaza in front and the parking tucked neatly, and how you'd get access in and out of the site. So this is an exciting prospect for the neighborhood. And Mark McQueen, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to unmute yourself and talk just a little bit about how this fits in with your vision for the consolidation of recreation facilities in a safe location.
So thank you, Victor. Certainly when we look at the intersection of 15th and Martin Luther King Boulevard, it's a principal intersection within the city. And what we have found from traffic counts is that there are approximately 30,000 vehicles that transit that intersection every day. And so we have an opportunity to really stage a primary gateway to the Glenwood community, and certainly to the west side of the Martin Luther King Boulevard. As Victor described, there's immense opportunity for multi-use development. And then on the east side is to create a prominent gateway civic asset that is a community center where adults can gather, principally adults. That's not to say children can't be there, but it's principally geared toward adult activities, social, banquet halls, having education space in there, computer lab, all of those things that are adjacent to that primary intersection where, quite candidly, it's not necessarily a safe environment for kids to be running around. Obviously, over time, we've been alerted by DOT that there's going to be north of that intersection the flyover that's going to take place over 231. And so really what we want, the vision is that we would take that space where the Martin Luther King Rec Center currently is located and repurpose it for the purpose of creating it as the Martin Luther King Community Center. So then the conversation says, well, what are we going to do about our youth? Because we must invest in our youth. And the idea is that we would move to the right of that location, 3 blocks, and put in a 20-acre complex that I'm commonly referring to as the Glenwood Community Sports Complex. It'd be adjacent to Wood Field, and so we would refurbish Wood Field. We would put in 3 multi-use fields, football, soccer, lacrosse type things, outdoor with lights, and that we would look to have a multi-court gymnasium, as well as a comprehensive state-of-the-art rec center, all located there within walking distance. Obviously, one of the things that we heard loud and clear in on the 15th of June when we had the Glenwood community virtual charrette was the fact that we wanted to have more walkability. And so that certainly ties into what we're striving for as we have these premier gateway locations, the development to the west of Martin Luther King Boulevard, the grand entrance that also accentuates the Martin Luther King Community Center, and a rendition of what that could look like is on this screen on the bottom right-hand corner. And then obviously really invest in our youth with a safe place for them to play, multi-field activities, robust programming that has the capability of doing indoor and outdoor while supporting the recreation that is so vital to our citizens.
So Mark, that concept is also stitched into this big illustrative plan I was describing. But we thought while we were close up here on the community center, you should take a minute and explain that. Maybe go on to the next one and we'll describe the rest of this. Another question that came up a lot was, how can the vacant parcels along MLK be filled in with development? And as you know, those got trimmed down or shaved a little bit when the road, or a lot, when the road was widened, and a great many buildings were there in the past, as we saw from the old fire insurance maps, that are now gone and in most cases have not been replaced. So architect Madi Chael spent the whole week studying example sites up and down MLK and in other places in Millville and St. Andrews as well, to see what kinds of building types and their parking and yards and so on would fit to provide some of this missing housing and other possibilities like live-work combinations and commercial buildings along those MLK lots. So this is just to give you an idea of the kind of sketches that were being done for that. We have, here's an example of a courtyard apartment building or live-work units, as I called them before, simple short shopfront buildings. And these are often the kinds of housing that are hard to find in a town that has gotten in the habit of building single-family detached houses on large lots and in the habit of building giant apartment complexes or condo buildings, but doesn't have much of this so-called missing middle. So it turns out that Glenwood has a great many places that are perfect for that, including corner lots and so on. So this is an attitude that we took toward the plan, which was that it might be possible to accept growth and change in this neighborhood in a way that helps grow it out of its problems and makes it more complete, but still is very gentle to the people who've been there all along and their experience of the place and their homes. So it doesn't feel like you have to have one or the other. You can actually have growth and change on the community's terms. So here's an example of how some of those building types might lay into the illustrative plan. And so we went along and during the course of the week, we did something similar for Millville. This is that illustrative plan. We drew the areas that are possible for significant infill development. Millville is much more complete, and it has a lot less vacant property than Glenwood does, but it still does have some really sensitive sites, including the ones where land meets the water. In this picture, we're up over Watson Bayou, and we're looking more or less northeast. And so you can see 3rd Street, which is an east-west street there. And what's right in the middle of this picture in the foreground is the land that's been acquired for the city's Millville Waterfront Park. Now you notice 3rd Street becomes kind of a bridge and disappears off the bottom of your screen. We're going to talk in a minute about what that is. And then as you go off toward the upper right of your screen, that's 3rd Street, which is the historic main street of Millville. And so I realized that reinforcing with gentle, old Florida, real Millville-like development, you could actually make that scene much better. And there could be new development along Maple that would overlook the park, which would be great. Give eyes on the park for safety and take advantage of the investment that the community has made to strengthen the tax base with private components. And then off to the left of your screen is Snug Harbor. And so, as you probably know, there's a plan to greatly improve the Snug Harbor facility, have a boat ramp at that location. And that's, of course, right adjacent to where Maple meets 5th. And so if you take all these components together, 3rd and Sherman, Maple, the park, and Snug Harbor, and imagine how they might be in the future, it could be something like this. One of the concepts in this sketch, and Amy, you might just put your cursor over it, is a walkway that would lead along Watson Bayou between the waterfront park and going north along towards Snug Harbor. There's a little bit of development that's already happened there. There's a good deal more development that's likely to happen in the future. And so this is the right time to say, let's get together as a community and figure out how to make that happen. So first sketch, what if, for the Millville Waterfront Park. Now, as the slides catch up with the next one is going to let us look at it from above. So now we're looking at a map view. And on the left is what I just showed you. The waterfront park areas have already been designated for that, and ways that can be paired with private development on the east of Maple, park pavilion buildings within the park. And then we'll hear more in a few minutes about a significant opportunity to open up one of the natural courses of stormwater. So take some water that's in a pipe and open it up to the daylight for a lot healthier water quality as it enters Watson Bayou and ultimately the bay. And at the same time, make a scenic feature within the park that will be a big addition. Plus an amphitheater and other uses. Now on the right, you see what happens in a longer term vision for the future, where the city's water treatment plant has been decommissioned and relocated and replaced. And then that island where the waste treatment plant exists now could become part of the park. And so in this sketch now you see reforestation of that island, plus the walkways and paths and open spaces that will be part of that green vision. So just imagine in the future being able to walk along, starting at Maple in the park and working your way north. Now, just not very many steps away from what I just showed you is the intersection of Sherman and 5th, or Business 98. And this picture from Google Earth kind of shows the grim conditions that we became all too familiar after Hurricane Michael, demolished buildings, taking a while to clear up, vacant property where something's been cleared up and the tree canopy lost. But the street itself is also kind of looking like an incomplete project, where when the DOT did what they did to Business 98 back in the distant past and set it up as a 4-lane road, they may have included something that looks like a sidewalk, but it's not really an inviting place to walk, and no shade, of course, no accommodation for cycling. And it looks like a wide open road and you can drive as fast as you want. Not necessarily the best neighbor for trying to build back the neighborhood feel. So we started looking at this a little more closely and thinking, how could this be evolved in the future? Here's a photograph, more recent one now, so the trees are coming back a little bit, but showing the existing conditions. 4 lanes, 2 in each direction. They're a little on the big side, so it's actually encouraging a little speeding. And here's a what if. What if, as development takes place on the private properties, the street itself can also be tamed and gradually improved? You know, a 4-lane road and a 3-lane road have very similar traffic capacities. And you'll hear in just a moment from our traffic engineer about that idea. However, a 3-lane road is much safer than a 4-lane road because on 4 lanes you have rear-ending accident potential that goes away when we have 1 lane in each direction and turn lane instead of the combined through and turn lanes that come with 4 lanes. So this is actually a safety improvement. It's routinely done as a kind of so-called road diet, restriping the road. But if you do that, you actually will discover that there's room in the right-of-way to have a line of trees, to accommodate bikes, to have a nice sidewalk that the new buildings could face. The character of this could be profoundly different a generation from now. Just imagine the difference if you as a pedestrian walk up to this intersection and see a high visibility crosswalk like the one you see there in the foreground, instead of the kind of perfunctory going through the motions white stripes that are there now. You'll be sent a different message about how welcome you are in Millville. So what if? Now, this is useful to always get up at a higher angle and look at how some of these components go together. Now we're looking at 3rd Street, historic Main Street, probably the most sensitive spot, and it's very tight, very narrow, and so change can come to this spot, but it has to be done very carefully and surgically, both in the architecture of new buildings where there's vacant property, and in gentle refurbishment of the street. But we have started, we're not finished, but we started one of those before and after pictures for this spot as well. And what you can kind of make out here in the gray center of the picture are sketches for potential new buildings to kind of fill in the lost space and pair up with the historic ones, match them in terms of their architecture and their street orientedness, and make the downtown of Millville feel complete again. Now, there are lots of places we realized where that kind of gentle infill can be done, including some where there are unconventional components that need to be worked around, like corner parking lots and so on. Or places where a building or an intersection might have been built originally for housing, but now it needs to be capable of supporting a small neighborhood business or other workplace, or like someone's office, what have you. So Justin Wallace illustrated here, and it goes from before in the upper right to after in the lower right, how those kind of surgical, careful, gentle additions to buildings could make an intersection like this one do just what I described. So that's a combination of historic preservation and adaptive reuse, and adding new places to live to make the neighborhood more complete. So the sketches that we did for the buildings that might work on such sites, this is one of my child sketches, include you know, the traditional shopfront building, which would have its parking on the side or in the back, not in the front, and small cottages. Now, speaking of missing middle housing, you know, it was traditional for a long time to have combinations of houses like duplexes or triplexes or fourplexes. Here's a quadruplex, so 4 units in a single building, but it's actually designed like a big grand house. Some people call these mansion apartment houses. This is an illustration of how 4 units could be created on what would have once been only room for one house. And here's how you could pair that up with other things like cottages or bungalows or even shop fronts and live-work combinations, buildings over parking, that can make it possible to take sites where you might have thought in the past only one house would fit, and actually bring a number of folks into the neighborhood, including those who are looking for a smaller, more affordable place to own or rent, and where they wouldn't have to take care of a big yard. So this is not for everywhere. This kind of densification, gentle densification, is for the certain places where you do want it, not for everywhere. But there's a lot of creative ways you can accommodate living and parking for people who are storing cars without needing huge lots in order to do it. So here's some illustrations of little cottages that actually have tuck under parking. Small is beautiful when it comes to infill development, because in the fine grain of buildings, it kind of adds together to a village character. It's a lot harder to add just a handful of really huge buildings and have the texture and quality of the historic city. Let's go over to St. Andrews and look for a minute. The first thing is that in the illustrative plan, we add the missing trees, we envision the missing infill development, envision ways that the place is made more resilient for future storms. And this is an interesting one, because as you know, St. Andrews around the lake and the boat basin and the marina has very low lying areas which are subject to flooding. And as we anticipate sea level rise, that will become more and more of an issue to resolve. More on that shortly. So we took this map and we then got up in the air again and looked down from above. So now we're looking from just over the marina, let's say, approximately northeast. So on the right side of your screen, you're seeing 11th Street come in, and the 11th is that really important east-west street that connects all these neighborhoods. And in the foreground of your image, you see the marina. And then there's Bayview Avenue, it runs right parallel to it with the boat ramp, and then BECK Avenue, the main street of St. Andrews, just behind it, and Chestnut, the next street over. As you go from the right side of the screen toward the left, you see 11th Court, then 12th Street. Then there's the boat basin and the lake. And right in between the two, you can still see sketched in here, no longer existing, the recently demolished Copacabana Hotel site, a really crucial site for a lot of reasons. And I'll talk about it in terms of architecture and real estate development and economic development, but we're also going to talk about it in terms of placemaking and resilience as we get closer in. Here was the first sketch illustrating that there might be ways to gently add, including gently adding parking to St. Andrews while minimizing replacement of buildings and demolition. So we took this first sketch and we made a little bit more of an advanced version of it. And in a subsequent presentation, I promise we'll zoom in close and we'll look at this in more detail. We'll by then have more color and more refinement, and probably will have made 2,000 or 3,000 edits to it by that time. But in this image, what you see is that really the Copacabana site is where the view can be opened to the east toward the lake, and at the same time deal with problems of flooding that are happening during that in that lowest lying area, and still get a substantial new kind of signature landmark kind of development overlooking the lake and overlooking the neighborhood. And then to the west of Beck Avenue, you can see what we've done here was we tucked the development a little to the north to keep it up out of the lowest lying area that could become a park, a floodable park space. And then in between the two sides of this image in the middle, you can probably make out, and Amy, maybe you can put your cursor over at a site reserved for a garage between Beck and Chestnut south of 12th Street, and some small scale strategic infill on the corners where that are vacant or have surface parking lots now. So this is a lot of components, right? Transportation, parking, walkability, real estate development, sea level rise, parks. And we realize there's a lot to take in. So not to worry, you're going to get to see this in more detail in just a minute. Can you back up one more time, Amy? I just want to point out one last thing. A lot of people brought to our attention the need for better solutions to handling the garbage that comes out of the St. Andrews. So while that sounds like a tedious or mundane, technical, everyday detail, I want to just say to those folks, we heard you. We realize that clearly does need to be consolidated. And the biggest businesses, the great big restaurants and so on, need their own dumpsters and grease traps and regular pickups daily, if not more than once a day. Clearly that. But the small businesses that you hope will fill in and cluster in and around the other successes of St. Andrews are going to need a shared facility, a combined way to do those things. And so, Amy, maybe you can just circle with your cursor. We identified a couple of places here where very compact facilities can be installed mid-block, shared through a cooperative arrangement with multiple businesses. So you could have a trash shack and the dumpster is in an area that is slightly air conditioned or cooled, so spoilage won't be as bad. You can have a compactor to get that stuff down into a smaller size before it's picked up. And you can have a recycling area for cardboard and things of the like. So this is the way that mature places do it when they grow more complete. So if you go to Nantucket or on to Woods Hole, you're going to find this kind of facility in their fishing villages because they know fishing villages make garbage and you have to be able to resolve it. So there's a message for the folks who have been texting me madly this week about garbage in St. Andrews. We heard you. Now, come back out to streets and placemaking for a second. Here's that intersection at Beck. And when you look at the existing conditions, what you see is a street that has a whole lot of road. Well, it's the DOT highway, right? So that's not too surprising. And there's enough room in here to do from building face to building face to make a much more pleasant place. You have to get under control and balance the amount of space used for cars and boats on trailers and the amount of space available for other things. So we looked at this closely and we realized that if in fact the city takes control of Beck Avenue and it can be redesigned as a people-friendly place, and you can undo some of the extra and unneeded asphalt. You can deliberately get the traffic speeds down to where it's safer even in the off-peak times when there aren't many people. That's when people drive too fast, is when there's not a lot of traffic. When there is traffic, people circulate, but they do so at a slower pace. And then you can have room to, in addition to driving space and car space, you can have room for street trees and outdoor dining and generous sidewalks for walking. That's the sort of thing you need to do in order to attract infill development on the lost space, like the surface parking lots, which are obviously land banks and should probably not be so needed in the future when those parking spaces are replaced in a shared facility. So what if on this site, the things I just described were to change? Take a second for Zoom to bring that to your screen. Okay, now you might have all just gotten whiplash from being suddenly taken from first gear to fourth gear, but here's a first sketch, that's all it is, of what such a street could be like. And what's happened here is the street was made the right size, the space was recaptured for walking, for trees, for outdoor dining, and the street was made curbless, so when you close it on festival days, it'll feel like one big plaza. The intersections made more evident for walking, and then the lost space on the corner recaptured for a site for a relatively small village scaled example of a building. Amy, do you mind backing it up just once since we just gave everybody whiplash? The before and after business is a risky business. But what we're trying to say here is that we love St. Andrews, and St. Andrews is great. There's so much about St. Andrews you want to keep, but you also want to add to St. Andrews to make it more complete. So before and after. What if? So there's a Beck Avenue that is quite a bit different. For those who wondered if we were going to propose anything bold and ambitious and difficult, there it is. There's one. There are also starter ideas that came from the, like the ones you just heard, and many others that came from the St. Andrews Waterfront Partnership and from the Merchants Group and from the Keep St. Andrews Salty gang, and some of those had to do with making the marina better. So we've begun to sketch on top of that, see what possibilities might exist for consolidating and organizing the traffic, the boat trailer parking, and other things, get more people down closer to the ship store, enjoying the view, and make really walking out onto the marina one of the special things to do in St. Andrews. That could include a gateway or an arch or the like entrance at the entrance to it, like a Navy Pier or the Santa Monica Pier. The exact design of which should be the subject of a lot of scrutiny, but we started sketching what kinds of things that might be like and how the edges of the marina might both maintain the working waterfront feel and be pedestrian friendly. Su Zhang in our office has done a lot of these sketches, was working on that while others of us were scurrying around looking for places for the trash shack or the compactor room. So let's switch over to the subject of transportation just for a minute. And I'll start with this one, and then I'd like Rick Hall, our transportation engineer, to take you from here. But when you get up in the sky and you look down at these neighborhoods, you realize that 15th and 11th and Beach Drive and 4th, 5th, and 6th and 3rd are all really important east-west streets that need transformation, not just within these three areas, but in between them as well. Rick, do you want to talk a little bit about the vision for connected streets?
Yeah, my camera is not able to come on, but I'll speak to them. The bicycle system that is evolving under this plan is substantial because it's becoming more and more popular with citizens everywhere.
Amy, we have the context class map up, or chart up. Could you put
we do.
The bike map back up, please? It was only on for a microsecond there, Rick, so you can talk about the bike map. There you go.
There was a year not too long ago when bicycles outsold automobiles in the United States. It's about 6 or 8 years ago. So people are really getting out and getting active on their bicycles because you can go quite a good distance. And many people talk to us about it. They like to connect between downtown Glenwood and Millville all the way over to St. Andrews. And so 11th Street is the best corridor that we have analyzed to enhance the bicycle facilities on 11th, and as well as down by the water if that can happen over time. So we've got that in mind as designing some of the individual streets for better bicycling, but getting a better network for people to move from place to place. Now, when we come into an area like this one, we see many types of development that are different. We see more the strip commercial development that you have on, say, on 23rd Street, and where most of the people drive in their automobiles to those locations. And that's pretty much the standard for the United States, and it has been over the past 30 or 40 years. But more and more places, hundreds and hundreds of places, are saying, we sure do want to introduce a walkable pattern. So this map was developed by the Florida DOT in work with people like Victor and Joe Cole and ourselves, to better describe the difference between the automobile dominant places and the places where walking is a lot more feasible. So they divided it into 6 zones. We don't have an urban core, that's like downtown Jacksonville or Orlando, but we can have urban centers. So, and there's C5. And then C4 is a general walkable urban area as you move back toward the middle of that spectrum. And then C3 suburban is divided into commercial and residential. So we are dealing mainly in these 3 areas, and we did with downtown, in the range of C4, general walkable town, and C5, kind of an urban center, village center, where it's a bit more concentrated and you have a greater mix of commercial. So what we're saying about these classifications, it's not just for the fun of it. It's once you get those kind of classifications identified for every acre of your town, then you can begin to say, this is what our vision of the future is for more of a place like a C5 or C4 instead of C3. So if what you have today is C3 and you want to have C4, then you'd have to be proactive about getting it. So we did spend a good bit of time trying to see where in a large area of C4, general walkable, with the great block size and everything that you have, where are we going to have some areas where it ramps up a little bit? And these red dots are those places that we've seen either in existing conditions or in a future condition could be a center that would have more of a mixed use for residential and commercial. And the dashed line is not the extent of the C5 area. It's just showing you where you could walk to and from in 5 minutes. That's a 1/4 mile radius, 1/2 mile diameter. And you can walk to the center, to the edge in 5 minutes. And we use that as a kind of a rule of thumb for this kind of planning when we're doing it. So you can see that we had 2 of those C5 kind of nodes in St. Andrews. And in the other areas, we've described those on Business 98. 2 of them in Millville, one at SHERMAN and one at East Avenue. Then we thought we would begin to look at one down near the shipbuilding company, south of the elementary school there on East. And Glenwood, they all line right up on Martin Luther King Boulevard. And we've talked a lot already about the one at US 98 and Martin Luther King as an emphasis center. And then on 11th, and then down near the hospital at 6th or 7th on the south end. Now, what do you do about US 98 and Martin Luther King Boulevard? It seems overwhelming, but it can be enhanced in a way that more and more people would be able to use different modes of transportation. And this is a drawing of what we're proposing for 98 and Martin Luther King Jr. As you are on a bicycle and you come down the outside lane, and you're traveling toward the intersection, you would be able to come straight across where the solid green paint is, or you could turn and go across the intersection where the solid green paint would lead you and your cycling friends along that. All of this happens with traffic signals that tell you when to stop and when to go as a bicyclist, in addition to as a car driver. Notice that that car is turning and it seems to be stopping for that pedestrian. And that's a corner island that keeps the drivers from turning too closely into the pedestrian and bicycle paths. And so those islands kind of discipline the driver into a turning path that is more safe for everybody.
So bottom line here, Rick, is it may seem impossible, but it's not impossible to make these intersections good for pedestrians and cyclists, as well as maintaining their openness and workability for cars and freight.
And so when it looks a little tight with those islands and everything, people may think, well, how in the world are the trucks, the 18-wheeler trucks, going to make it through this kind of intersection? And the next slide shows that we have a way to track the trucks and give them an island that's lower so they can trailer those wheels over that, similar to what you see with a modern roundabout, where they get up on a concrete area in the center of a roundabout. So the trucks can make these turns, and we would design it only if they could. So you see the cyclist heading away from us in the bicycle lane. Our particular plan has a row of trees on that median. This one shows what looks like a concrete median between the cars and the cyclist. We're going to plant some generous trees in that area to just green the entire thing up. So this is what it looks like in our first cut at placing that kind of design on US 98 going right to left, and Martin Luther King Jr. going north and south. Now, in order to make the crossing a little more tolerable and more pedestrian and bicycle friendly, we have removed the right turn lane that is on the eastbound approach, the one on your left side. There's a right turn only lane today out there, and that would be taken out, and that space would be used for the tree planting strip and the bicycle lane. So it's a one-way bicycle lane on either side of each of these roadways. So as you come up, you just make your turn and go straight ahead or left as a cyclist.
I think this is a good spot to point out that in making these kinds of improvements, you're not talking about taking away the ability of the streets to perform their traffic function. Like, for example, we know MLK Boulevard was widened partly to make sure there was a clear and direct path to the hospital, to keep the hospital viable and competitive for people who might have otherwise gone somewhere else. And so the improvements that you're suggesting don't take that away. They keep that, right?
That's right. And the volumes, the first thing we do is to see if we can do what we call a road diet, where you just take lanes away. And we determined that we should not reduce the total number of lanes. So we still have 4 lanes on Martin Luther King, and we have 4 lanes on 98. But what we've done is taken away a few of those auxiliary lanes, those turn lanes, to try to narrow the facility and slow it down just a bit based on that. The presence of trees on the right side, the left side, and then the center median along Martin Luther King will also help manage the motor vehicle speed, which is the most dangerous thing for the pedestrians and the bicyclists. We've gone to 11-foot lanes and no parking on Martin Luther King, but a generous planting area and a bicycle lane on each side of the street. So this is just a little bit south of that corner. Now, moving on further down on East Avenue, Business 98 and 5th Street, this is what the cross-section might look like. So again, bicycle lanes provided for exclusive use of bicycles and perhaps scooters. The reason we know that these bike lanes will be successful is all across the nation, people are saying, I'm not going to use a bike lane that's right next to the travel lane because it's just too dangerous. And of course, the professional, near professional cyclist will be in the middle of the road with the cars, with their spandex and their helmets on and everything else. So they want to go fast all the time. But that intermediate group of level 4, 5, 6, and 7 maybe, they have poured into these kind of lanes in other cities where they've been provided with in great numbers. You give people an opportunity to be away from the cars, and they will use it more often. Now, there's some odd things about this drawing. You see 2 cars in the middle. Those are in travel lanes, 10-foot wide travel lanes. And then adjacent to that, you have 2 parking lanes. And that's symbolized by a vehicle with no driver sitting in the driver's seat. See, the 2 in the middle have little heads right in the windshield. And then you see the trees in the same line as the parked cars. We have designed a system where you would have 2 or 3 parallel parked cars, then a tree, then 2 or 3 more parallel parked cars and a tree. What that does is provide shade for everybody, the parked cars and the cyclists and the pedestrians, yet it helps with the speed management to have that many trees. So moving to other streets in the area, again, we have East Avenue, just south of 2nd Court in Millville. And that's what it looks like today. And we would provide a similar section to the one we were just talking about. Here we have 11-foot lanes for the regular automobiles, and then a 9-foot parking lane, and then the sidewalks on either side. So in this case, we've provided parking adjacent to the center lanes, but it's going to be slow enough that the cyclists can make their way along in the center of the travel lanes.
Rick, just to kind of get us to the summary here at the end, the Beck Avenue slide for a second, Amy. The important thing here is that the rights of way that were laid out very intelligently by the founders in years past are all set up there. It's just that they haven't had the finishing and adjustments that other cities have gotten around to, and that's why the tree canopy is missing, or the sidewalk isn't complete. A couple of the commissioners told us about how important sidewalks are in their communities, and that many of the neighborhoods don't even have that yet. And so we are asking you to sort of squint at the existing conditions and imagine a long backlog of public improvements that could be done in a systematic, little bit every year kind of way to implement improvements. Now, Mark, on Beck, I'll ask you to unmute your mic. I know the city manager wanted to specifically answer the question about handicap parking in St. Andrews, and that's one of the things that we were taking into account in the cross section for Beck Avenue we talked about just before. So Mark McQueen, if you're within the sound of my voice, this is your chance to answer the question about disabled parking in St. Andrews.
Hey, thank you. It's not only in St. Andrews, but all of our community spaces. One of the things that we are committed to is making sure that we have handicap accessible spaces throughout the city. This is important to be inclusive of all of our citizens as well as our visitors, to make sure that there's mobility for all. And so the intent is definitely to integrate handicap spaces, lift spaces, those types of things throughout what we design for our city.
This particular view of Beck Avenue has, again, we know what works, and if you tell us you want walkability, we can generally deliver it for you in good design based on what we've seen in other studies throughout the United States. I carry a speed gun with me in my briefcase, and I'm measuring speeds all the time everywhere I go, so I know a fast street from a slow street. And these are 2 10-foot lanes and 8-foot parking on either side. And in downtown St. Andrews, we will get the traffic moving so slowly that the pedestrians and the bicyclists will be comfortable enough there without needing their own separate bike lane to go on their longer trips. Now notice the pavement level here. There are no curbs. It just goes flat all the way across. And that, again, tends to make the pedestrians feel more comfortable. It gives you more flexible on celebration days when you want to close streets off, Mardi Gras, etc. And it's a more usable space for the citizens to get their mobility accomplished. And again, we have the lanes against the edge of the sidewalk. In this case, we're leaving a unique opportunity. Notice it says curb lane and planting. It doesn't say parking lane. And what we're envisioning here in the heart of St. Andrews is that you would have a place where valet parking could happen, where Uber and Lyft type vehicle services could have a space to stop and let you get out and go to your restaurant without worrying about where you're going to park your car. So it's a more efficient use of the space overall, and we see a lot of cities moving in those directions. Seaside even has a valet parking service in downtown Seaside. Speaking of parking, we are doing in addition to the study with Dover Coal, we're doing a St. Andrews parking study, and the several points that are going to be accomplished in the parking study. We first go out and take an inventory. We count the spaces, public and private. We estimate future demand, and then we talk to a lot of people in the community saying, what about parking? Who's parking in one space for 6 hours all day long, for example? And what do we do about that? So then we develop strategies when we have a database, and we may set some time limits, 2-hour limits. There may be some pricing. This parking will cost you $1 an hour, $2 an hour. And then enforcement. There's not much enforcement that we've heard about so far, and we're going to check into that. And then that's in the short term. The longer term is develop projects for additional parking spaces if it's determined that they're needed and the management of the entire system requires you to store your vehicles in one place and then do your walking and bicycling and everything in more of the city. And our report will be drafted in August and finalized in September. And we'll be looking at really all modes of travel that need a place to park, bicycle parking, etc. Even parking for the boat ramps. All of you know that when you trailer your boat from wherever you live in Bay County or further away, you want to launch it and have a secure place that you place your vehicle and your trailer while you're enjoying the water courses for fishing. And right now, the boat ramp in St. Andrews is very active. The one at in the Civic Center downtown has been very active for many years. And then there's a Snug Harbor boat ramp over on Business 98 that is going to be a focal point of the city in getting more boat access there. The Bob George boat ramp over further into Millville is another opportunity. So there are multiple boat ramps, and we need to spread the demand over all of those in an equitable way. So circulation and parking doesn't bog down the functions of the town when you want to take care of all the shop owners and shop visitors and restaurant patrons. And I guess there is a reopening, a grand reopening, isn't there, Mayor, about the one over on near the Hathaway Bridge? Mark or the mayor?
Yes, we are. This is Greg. Believe it or not, after years of waiting on funding from the oil spill and the hurricane and COVID and the laydown area for the pipes, for the new pipes going across the Hathaway Bridge, the boat ramp at Carl Gray will be open and available on the 4th of July. Believe it or not.
That's big news. That'll be a lot of relief for a lot of people.
Yes, it will.
Thank you, Mayor.
So as a bottom line, your transportation, we're helping you develop a vision based on what you tell us. And if that vision is coded into your reports and into your zoning, then we can go over to Florida DOT and talk to them about, this is what the people want, this is what the citizens need. And we can talk them off of some of their faster, wider streets and get something in special places that you designate that'll be much more walkable and bikeable. That's the way to get it done. Thank you very much.
So good evening, everyone. I'm John Ford, civil engineer with the Horsley Witten Group, and I think here's where I pick up to talk about the Resilient Green Network. So what we heard from you and really reflecting back to you are three goals when we were looking at open space, stormwater management, environmental concerns, and in all three of these neighborhoods really were, how can we improve and create better quality open spaces and parks? So Great Parks was one of the cornerstones of this plan, as you're hearing it from us this evening. So how can we create types of spaces within each community that are not one size fits all, different sizes, serving different uses? Number two, how can we increase access to the water? So critical. A city that is connected to the water physically, visually, I would say, economically, and more. Not just in bursts, in spaces that connect to the water, but how can we create contiguous waterfront access in the three communities? And what are opportunities to do that? And number three, we heard a lot from folks over the last couple of months and as part of the downtown plan as well, how important the environmental water quality health of the bay and the bayous are. And the interesting thing about that, that's really connected to the health of the land. The more the land can act as a sponge and soak stormwater runoff in before it finds its way to the bayous and the bay, really is better for the bay and the bayous. So I'm showing these drawings we did. It's really a homage to drawings we saw from Jane Perry. They were wonderful as part of the downtown plan, looking at how the land used to be. And you can see these fingers extending into all three communities, the natural extensions of the bayous that over time have been paved over and erased in a lot of ways. So one of our goals, this is still the way that the natural systems connect, where runoff finds its way. So these are really cues to us to start establishing and reestablishing that green network. So the beautiful thing about the green network is it connects in a lot of ways, the water and land, and it provides a lot of benefits. I've seen some questions and we've received them over the last couple of months, and I see a few questions in the chat about, who's going to pay for this? And a green network provides environmental benefits and a long list of environmental benefits. But the wonderful thing about it is the multiple benefits that the green network kind of linked through the three communities can provide in terms of providing access to nature, providing opportunities for health to get out and walk trails, and to really support, especially in Glenwood, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to focus over time as small steps towards redevelopment are taken, that those can happen most efficiently and most economically at the centers that you've heard about, and really allow the rest of the land in between, again, over time and in small steps to start to heal. There are multiple steps underway in terms of FEMA funding to support wetland mitigation programs. The city, and we spoke with their consultants this week about studying stormwater management and a master plan that includes the majority of Glenwood. So the city is looking for projects that are funded and that can provide those multiple benefits. And instead of coming solely from a stormwater master plan done by engineers, and I can say that because I am one, this is really the perfect time for this vision plan to identify systems that can be funded by infrastructure money that provide benefits to parks and great places that we've heard from for you, and help connect within the neighborhoods. So I'm going to go through the three neighborhoods. We've looked in great detail at all three neighborhoods. We'll include kind of a few big ideas, and we want to hear from you about them. So the Glenwood existing green framework is really quite sparse, as you know, and it was one of our main goals was to increase the green
network throughout Glenwood. So Henry Davis Park, obviously there are many other assets, including the cultural center. What we see here is really a what if. What if those natural bayou fingers are restored in the places that it makes sense and help support the redevelopment centers, but provide a system of trails, provide healing of the land, and connect to the primary pedestrian and bicycle street connections, which you see here, restore wetlands and connect to existing parks, but also start to add new small spaces so that everyone in Glenwood can be within at least 5 minutes of a neighborhood park. Now this will take time, but we believe that looking at these systems as part of an integrated approach really will provide many benefits and allow multiple funding sources to start achieve some of these small steps. So we started looking at what some of those steps might mean. This is just south of the intersection of MLK and 15th. So this is a green system that's kind of been covered over time. We know that the swale ditch system in the backyards, and that's where a lot of these systems kind of have been relegated to the backyards where you can't see them and they collect trash and erosion is an issue. So finding ways for these to serve additional stormwater function for the local neighborhood and also have things like trails, potentially small gathering places so that there are eyes on these spaces. They serve a value and a purpose, community gardens, potentially boardwalks, and they can be funded by infrastructure money in part. We did the same thing in Millville, tried to find ways to recover those natural systems and fingers. So we know, we heard a lot about Joe Moody Harris Park and Daffin Park and improvements that are needed there. Really, a lot of the focus was on the waterfront park because that seems to have such potential to be transformed and well used as a jewel for the community over many years to come. And we also looked north and identifying additional community spaces that really don't exist in the north part of Millville, west of Sherman Avenue near Rosenwald High School. So again, connecting those systems up with trails, and you see my second key goal for us was contiguous waterfront access. So you heard a little bit about that in discussion of some of the redevelopment near the waterfront park, and that kind of black dashed line is really critically important. What an opportunity for Millville to connect to the waterfront and provide an opportunity to connect maybe in different places from the neighborhood and walk along the waterfront to get to and from the waterfront park or Snug Harbor or other places. So we did look deeper at the waterfront park design. Victor mentioned the existing, there's a 30-inch stormwater pipe that is what used to be a natural finger of the bayou that's been put underneath the park. And you can see that on the north half of the park. So that pipe was put in relatively recently. So there may be an opportunity to restore that natural system, or maybe that waits for a future phase because the green space exists. But the key in this drawing is the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street, the sense of arrival, to have eyes on the street again from redevelopment along Maple, provide a gathering spot, kind of an invitation into what is a pretty large space. We show 2 open air pavilion buildings that could host small or large gatherings, farmers markets, and then allow you to move further into the space towards the water. Because the additional triangle of land south of 3rd Street and west of Maple is under city control, it kind of provides an opportunity to think a little bit differently, that perhaps the parking and kayak launch could be moved south and get those kind of functional elements of the park in that place, getting easy access to the water and not having parking kind of front and center when you arrive at that gateway at Maple and 3rd. So you see the opportunity with the wastewater treatment plant in that island, or what we heard was kind of, almost everyone we spoke to kind of envisioned a natural oasis type of feeling on the island, that you'd have a large gathering space on land and cross over what's currently a utility road that could be transformed into a wide path. To find yourself on the island, maybe a small gathering space focused on the water, but otherwise really an opportunity to enjoy the views and restore that area and put it back to nature, really. And we think that's realistic with the wastewater treatment plant really is in a location where it's at tremendous risk from nature. And that as that's moved and the city is working towards that, having a vision now and having the first steps towards the waterfront park moving in the direction of the grand vision, which could extend further south, as I mentioned, to provide access with a waterfront path, both north of Snug Harbor and south. So the St. Andrews overview is similar in terms of providing open spaces for all within the neighborhood, but different in some ways in terms of St. Andrews' vulnerability, with it being coastal and low-lying. So we did a deep dive on our study of the topography, the future sea level rise projections, and the storm surge, all of which really affects St. Andrews for the same reason due to its topography. And what you see on the right is a storm surge inundation model. And that light blue and darker blues are the inundation during a large storm event. And that, as you might expect, maps the topography. So for St. Andrews, really, to capitalize on its biggest asset, one might say, which is its connection to the water and its charm, which naturally has kind of placed itself right on the water, we need to be in balance with the risks and its vulnerability, which is a very common concern in coastal waterfronts. So the framework is focused largely on the waterfront and connectivity to and from the waterfront through the community. You can move ahead one. We've taken a similar approach in connecting the green fingers through the neighborhood with an opportunity to extend that green east along 13th Street. And I should mention all of our planning of these green networks is done in looking at the underlying property. So where might the city already have control of property? Where are there currently vacant parcels? Because we want this to be more than a pretty picture. We want to understand how it overlays with the reality of getting this done. And the third real key open space goal is really clearly expressed here in terms of access to the water and those dashed lines connecting further north along the water that as redevelopment happens, to make sure there's a continuous boardwalk, which is something we picked up on in the existing CRA plan, finding ways to connect that waterfront access along the bay and also Lake Ware, extending to the east. We looked at resiliency scenarios, and what I mean here is how can St. Andrews become stronger in a bend, not break, due to the challenges faced by storm events and also the daily nuisances of the tide, which we know flooding is a concern when it rains and the tide is high, that stormwater runoff has nowhere to go. So we tested those scenarios out. One scenario would be to harden the edge, to build a seawall of sorts so that storm events stay out of the downtown core. That's that dark blue line. What you see there with the light kind of broken line is the floodplain, what I talked about earlier, that area that's especially vulnerable. We looked at ways where the existing buildings, if you don't build a seawall, could adapt. So can they work with the water to allow water to come and go with special techniques for floodproofing? Those are the wet floodproofing techniques, or have gates, tide gates, or floodgates at doors and that type of thing, which I'm sure is something familiar to you. St. Andrews resiliency scenarios combining avoid and adapt. So protecting existing buildings through floodproofing techniques, but maybe finding a way for those lower lying areas shown in green there, if they were to all become green and let the water come in during tide, sea level rise, and storm event flood inundation, as a way to move development back. And then we looked at new construction opportunities and looked at the existing flood elevations So we understood that development sites and investment, what's needed to get those buildings up above flood elevation and freeboard, and how does that feel in terms of all of our other goals, including getting around St. Andrews, streetscapes, public realm, and quality of life. How do those face the street? Are we achieving all of the urban design and resiliency goals that we heard from you in the community? So really, it's going to take a balance of all of those. There's no one solution, especially as opportunities and investments come over time, both in infrastructure and private development. So we tested them and we drew to see what that would look like. This is the existing condition. We drew those scenarios to say, well, how could a building that's 5 or 6 feet above existing elevation terrace down to Lake Ware, for example? How might a system of parks extend north? Perhaps BECK becomes more of a bridge. Now, this is an extreme scenario to say this is more the avoid the risks scenario, that would maybe Lake Ware becomes bigger and those natural systems extend to the north and that wall edge moves. But really, as I mentioned, a balanced scenario is almost always the best approach. To say, here are buildings that are going to need to adapt within the historic core. Can we take the proposed buildings, move them back to provide a bit of a buffer, to provide what's shown as a floodable park right along the water, to allow for more natural system and boardwalk around Lake Ware, but also providing for the views and the investment opportunities that we know exist. So it's a combination of those approaches and also reinforce the streetscape in the public realm.
So of course, resiliency goes beyond just physical infrastructure. It includes the whole range of housing, the people of the community, and the health of the economy as well. So as you've seen on earlier slides and on this one as well, our housing strategy is really focused on providing a variety of housing, ranging from single-family detached projects or houses to apartment complexes to cottage courts here with maybe 10 or 12 units, or even the apartment over the garage. So we need to be able to address the needs of a whole range of households at different sizes and types and ages and income levels. So that becomes really important that we can provide the diversity, perhaps through some of these missing middle housing options. We have publicly owned land that could be made available to incentivize development, and we need to marshal our resources so that we can address the needs of market rate, affordable, and workforce housing, starting with the rebuilding of Masalina Memorial Homes and Fletcher Black public housing. So we see opportunities because Eastern Shipbuilding, Tyndall Air Force Base, and the port are expanding. They'll be bringing new people and and their families to the area, and many of those will want to live near their work. So as we looked around and we saw this great housing need, a number of parcels of land available and in city ownership, and then the needs of the community in terms of economic self-sufficiency, and develop this concept that we're calling the Academy of the Building Arts. So it would be a nonprofit nonprofit institute or group providing hands-on training in the construction arts, specifically, carpentry, drywalling, and all the things that detail houses that can then be consistent with the area's heritage and traditional styles of development. We'd be serving both youth and adults and people returning from incarceration, and they would combine classroom training with hands-on apprenticeships, actually building houses. So there are obviously a number of houses that need to be repaired and remediated within the neighborhoods, as well as the opportunities for new construction. And so we want to make use of all that, all those resources, and put together this cohesive approach to both the workers, the residents who want to be trained, but also the small local businesses that are getting their start and should have an opportunity to participate in the construction activity that's going on in the city. So we couple this with a home building initiative that would include things like taking small packages of city-owned lots and making them available to smaller contractors, as opposed to everything going to the major builders. We'd be able to focus technical assistance in terms of business plan writing, getting bonding, and the other kinds of things that go into construction. And one project or one approach that we've seen work very well in Chattanooga's Southside redevelopment is actually preparing a set of pre-approved house plans that fit within the neighborhood, are appropriate to the kinds of lots, the size of lots we have available, and have already been vetted through the city so that the individual contractor could reduce their risk and their cost and the time involved in getting started to build a new home. And beyond the construction side, we're recommending a business incubator that can provide office space and access to shared resources for small businesses in the area, giving them access to entrepreneurship training and assistance. And then they can be working with the students as well. And then, of course, there will be other people who need training but are not interested in being involved in construction. So that might be pipe fitters or welders or even green infrastructure installation and maintenance kinds of jobs, where we can combine them with literacy training and couple them with the kinds of supports that people need during that training period, with transportation or maybe financial support or childcare, to help make sure that they get over the hump. We'll be looking to recruit workers and to help reach out into the community to convince people that there are opportunities and that there are jobs at the end of the training process. Of course, broadband access has been a major issue for some of these communities, and I think we've seen it as we've gone through this COVID crisis, that's a more and more critical element to the health of a community. We also, of course, need to focus on the youth of the community, give them after-school activities and other sports to help build character and prepare them for life. So that would include the new Boys and Girls Club at Daffin Park, the Glenwood Communities Sports Complex and Recreation Center that the city manager talked about earlier, the Waterfront Park, and other recreational opportunities in the trails and the neighborhood parks that we've been proposing. And then finally, we heard from several people and getting ready for this effort that a charter school in Millville could be very helpful in better educating the children of the community, but also attracting new families to come and invest and buy a home within Millville.
So there you have it. We tried to compress into that much time, and it still took a lot to show you what had been put together in a very loose, still somewhat disassembled skeleton of ideas just over the last couple of weeks. And we have a lot of work to do yet. But what we can see, because as we become more familiar with this area, as we've talked to people in the deep, detailed interviews, and we have dived deep into the technical issues, is that there is room here. There's room to grow, there's room to build, there's room to preserve, there's room to restore. And so I can be more encouraged with where we are, but I realize we have a lot to do, lots of questions will remain after a thing like this. Amy and Brenda, you want to walk us through how we're going to seek some additional feedback in addition to the many 40 or so questions and suggestions that have already been typed into the Q&A?
Yep, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and Brenda is going to bring up the polling. And if that number will come back on when she shares her screen. As Victor mentioned, we just have a few questions, and you'll be able to use your phones to tell us your thoughts, what you're thinking.
Hi, so everybody can text to the number 22333. So you'll be able to see at the top, Dover Cole 516. That's the message that you'll be sending. And that's how you'll be able to text your answer. So the first question is, what is your age? And I see people already answering. So you know it works. So I'll just give you guys a few minutes to get that set up, and then this is how you'll be able to answer the questions we have. We have 5 questions.
So the first thing you do is send a text message to the number 22333, and that message needs to be DOVERKOHL 516. When you send that in, once that goes, you're in the poll. And each question that Brenda puts on the screen, like the one right now, what is your age? By the way, their first draft of this, you'll be glad to know, said, how old are you? And I made them change it. So this is much gentler. So when you'll see a question like this one, then you can just type your answer, how old you are, and the answer will come up. You'll answer A for under 18 or C for 36 to 50. So
it looks like we have a good range of people.
People are getting the hang of it.
Yeah.
It's Friday night. Don't see a lot of 19 to 35s at pub city planning meetings on Friday nights. But
yeah.
So as the answers are coming in, Brenda's on her dashboard able to tell when we've hit critical mass in terms of most of you having had a chance to answer. We're going to give this first one a little extra time just so that everybody gets the hang of this.
All right. Let's go on to the next one. Let's see.
While this next one's coming up, let me just take a second and acknowledge Amy Groves, whose picture is probably on your screen right now. Amy, give a wave. Amy is a principal in our firm and a project director on this effort. She's also served as the project director for our downtown plan for Panama City. And she was the person who I'm going to call you ringmaster. Amy, she was the one organizing all of us in all the different professional disciplines and all the folks on the city side and the public organizing the events. And Brenda Diaz, whose voice you've been hearing while we're doing the polling, has been her right hand and most valuable player, organizing these Zoom events, setting up these questions, doing some of the drawings, and between the two of them, what a dynamic duo. Thank you, Amy and Brenda, for all the work that you did over the last, 3 or 4 months getting ready for this.
Thank you. So you'll see this question. Did you participate in any of the online meetings this week or last week? It looks like we have 68% that joined us. Thank you. Thank you guys for coming back tonight as well. We appreciate you.
I think everybody's getting the hang of it.
Yeah. So the next one. So this one is in one word. Tell us what idea you're most excited about. So please use one word, and if you can, if you have 2 words, like for example, boat ramp, you use a hyphen.
So the thing here is just the struggle, of course, is to find one word. But if you like the street trees idea, type trees. If you like the street design idea, type streets. If you like the park idea, type park. So as someone else types the same word you did, it will get larger on the screen. And as more people send in more answers to this question, they will accumulate on the word cloud in front of us. We should let this one run a little while because it takes a little longer than typing in the letter A or letter B. There's a lot of enthusiasm for development apparently, but we can understand there's room to grow and for the growth and change to make things better rather than worse. Seeing a lot of interest and enthusiasm for the things that have to do with the parks and open space, green, bike paths, marina, lake, trees. We also see things that have to do with building up the community's people, not just its bricks and mortar physical form. As Janice Lucas reminded us, people and programs, not just bricks and mortar. So investment in one another and adding housing, supporting minorities. There's St-Andrews-transformation. That's when someone's excited about that enough to type in all those letters.
All right, we're going to move on to the next one. So it takes a minute. All right, so what wasn't mentioned tonight that the team still needs to explore? Any ideas, concerns?
We didn't really talk about public transit. So just as an example answer, somebody might say, well, how come they didn't answer transit? So you could type that in. But this is both things that you feel like didn't get enough detail in the presentation, or something that we didn't bring up at all, but we need to know about. Probably one of those things you told us about in one of the meetings, and all those long lists that we have to go back through over the coming month as we work to refine this draft. A lot of answers coming in. Can you see them appearing on your screen? Lots of things have to do with the costs and finance. We saw some questions in the Q&A and chat also on the subject of, how much does it cost to do these things, and who's going to pay for it? What are the funding sources? Is there an implementation plan? You'll notice how some words appear bigger. That's because somebody just typed them. So when they first appear, then that word will appear larger, so you can see it adding to the list, and then it'll shrink down into the bigger list. Now, Brenda, they can answer this one more than once, right?
Yes, this one they can answer more than once.
Okay, so if you want to send multiple messages right now, you can. We're going to go back over this list. For the people who volunteered their time and felt strongly enough about this to come out on a Friday night, at least through Zoom, and volunteer time, we want to make sure that we're aware of what you want to know in the next presentation, where you feel like the answers need to be more complete, or the research needs to be more in depth.
I also want to mention thank you to everyone who's answering right now and giving us some real-time feedback, which is super helpful. But for anyone who is watching this video later on the website, or if you're having any technical difficulties using your texting right now, when we get this video uploaded to our website, we'll also replicate these same questions on the website, so that folks who didn't get a chance to participate tonight can also tell us their thoughts. So this is not, don't worry, this isn't your last time, but this is just our chance to get some, as I mentioned, real-time feedback from folks who are there. Thank you.
Now, the website that Amy's talking about is rebuildpc.org, and you first get to that, the welcome screen for that, just scroll down a little and you'll see a link to the Vision Hub. And that's where you find all the stuff about the neighborhoods plan, ways to engage, ways to watch recordings from previous events, ways to sign up for future events. Read resource materials or research that has been assembled there. Obviously, we'll put all of these images and things we showed you today, just a few seconds each. We'll put them up there very shortly, and you can download them in the form of a PDF and flip through them at your leisure. And we'll put a recording, as Amy mentioned. We stream this live on YouTube, but we will also post that recording of the video, including your answers to these questions and so on, right there, so you can tell your friend, hey, this was a neat meeting. Sometime over, next week, once you take a look at it, it'll be worth your time.
All right, are we ready for the next one? I think this is our last question. All right.
Are you ready?
Is the plan generally on the right track? Probably yes, maybe, probably no.
We know a lot of questions remain, and there are things we didn't get to, or things we just touched on and need a lot more fleshing out. But what we're trying to find out is if we're, in general, going in the right directions. We're not going to hold you to this. Obviously, as we come back in the summer with later in the summer with more detail, we may ask you this question again. Amy, any thoughts about that you want to start off now about what happens next? As people are getting their answers in. So Amy, why don't you unmute and talk about next steps while the answers are coming in?
Sure. So I want to remind everybody of the schedule that we talked about at previous events and earlier tonight. You know, we had these events this month to get things started, but this is not the last chance to give input. So we are going to be having some additional surveys going online soon, and we'll have some print versions of those distributed as well. So in the month of July, we're going to be getting some information about these ideas out and getting some feedback on it. I'm gonna, I'll share my screen here and so that y'all can see some key upcoming dates and the schedule. So, and then we will be coming back in August for some additional, hopefully in-person meetings. So we'll have to see what happens in terms of community gathering, but we're hopefully by August, we'll be able to see you all face to face. And all of that is working towards having a very first draft of the vision and plan by the fall. And so, again, I want to get those key timeline things up here. So you can check rebuildpc.org for updates. And again, we'll be getting, as soon as we have dates confirmed for August, we'll be getting those out and advertised. And everyone who signed up for this event will have your email. So we will be able to email you and let you know when that is. And I have on here my email. So if anyone has any questions to follow up from here, you can always go to our website and click the chat with the planner button or give us feedback on the website. Or you can just email me directly, and we'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts. And again, the website, just for those, you go to rebuildpc.org and you slide just past the main picture and you'll see where it says to participate in the neighborhoods plan. So the Vision Hub is the main site. That's where you can see videos. RSVP is when there's events coming up. You can RSVP for those events. Engage is where the surveys will be. So those are the three main links on the site. And with that, Victor, do you have any last words?
Why don't we ask City Manager Mark McQueen to do two things for us. One is answer that burning question about the Mardi Gras floats, and then finish us up tonight. Mark, are you able to unmute and give everybody the good night? But I know you're dying to answer that question about the Mardi Gras floats. So.
No, I appreciate it. Well, certainly we will make all of our streets float friendly as we do for our citizens. So no, this has been great, and I appreciate your great work on this and the whole team, and more importantly, I appreciate the citizens that have involved themselves in this process. This is a kind of a crawl, walk, run process that we're employing here, and it's going to take all summer for us to continue to refine what we're doing. But it's very clear that the city is going to have access to funding that it would never have had but for the storm. And so what we want to do is ensure that as we're rebuilding the city, that we ensure that we provide those plans to the appropriate agencies. And there's just a whole spectrum of funding sources that we're chasing to help us rebuild from Hurricane Michael. It includes not only the FEMA reimbursables, but also there's hazard mitigation monies, there's 404 money, there's also wetland monies that we're pursuing, special grants that we're pursuing, all of those in an effort to redesign the city. I will tell you, we've talked about this a lot, that Panama City has not reached its full potential, and this is our opportunity to do it. Every time I go to Tallahassee, or if I'm engaged with the federal authorities, the first thing they ask is, what is your plan? And so that's why this is so important, because I want them to see what the citizens want for the entirety of the city. And it's a whole city, and it's going to take time for us to rebuild it, and we're going to have to do it in phases, but we're going to have to get after this. Moving the Millville wastewater treatment, that's a big deal. But so far, I've not hit any resistance from anyone in authorities to do that, but for how to plan for the relocation. With that in mind, the state legislature heard our request and approved $500,000 to do the study to determine where we would move that to. And if we do, that certainly is a game changer there in Millville. We also want to look at opportunities for catalytic redevelopment and leveraging city properties that have been acquired over time to help to promote and stimulate the economies. And certainly we've seen an example of that in Glenwood. Getting the Martin Luther King Boulevard as the no kidding main corridor within not only Glenwood, but as revived as a business corridor is certainly paramount in my mind to what we can do for Glenwood. And certainly when we start talking about St. Andrews, we talk about BECK, but the challenge with BECK, as is with Glenwood, as is with Millville, is that those roads that go through them are all currently owned by DOT. And we've seen, as Rick Hall described, what happens when DOT only looks at solving a transportation problem and doesn't integrate into that planning or construction, streetscaping concepts and ideals, new urbanism ideas, economic development ideas. That's quite frankly is not their mission and charter. And so the concepts that Rick promoted in talking about C4 and C5 are going to be essential for us to begin to do appropriate land use changes to our codes and ordinances so that we can set the conditions for the kinds of communities that we want to develop. We want to raise up the entire city of Panama City, and that clearly is our objective. This is very grateful again for the citizen involvement, and there's so much more to be done. As Amy will share, there will be opportunities for continued input throughout the summer online. And then our heart's desire is to really have the charrettes in person in August. Clearly, we've got to look at the risk to our citizens, and we'll certainly inform our community as to when we're going to be able to do that safely so that all of our citizens can gather together. One thing that we clearly need to do more of is reach our younger people. Most of the folks that have been on these efforts, and I appreciate it, are quite frankly my age. And what we want to do is build the community and the city for those that are coming behind us. And we clearly have a segment that we need to reach out to more and try to gain their input as to what they want to see for the city. The key to our success is going to be working together. The key to our success is going to be continuing to create communication opportunities as we seek out this citizen-driven process and how we're designing the city for the future. If we really want to be the premier city in the Panhandle of Florida, we have to get our plans together, because and I know we've done these before, but the difference is this is our last chance to get it right before we move forward with exploring all of the funding options that are going to be out there for us to utilize. That's this absolute difference between what has been done before and what is being done right now. So with that, I thank you, Victor and Amy and the rest of the team at Dover Coal Partners. And more importantly, I thank the citizens of the city of Panama City. And before I turn it back over to you, Victor, certainly our mayor would be happy to share a closing comment.
Yes, listen, I think this was very productive tonight. And as it was said in the very beginning, this is a draft. And there was people asking specific questions about what things would cost and all that. And when you're doing a draft, we're still getting and gathering ideas. We wouldn't have specific costs down yet until we know what we want to do, and then we'll start costing it out. We will have an array of funds available from the federal government, as Mark said, as well as the infrastructure tax that we put in place a few years ago. So be patient. We are going to continue this process until we vet out all of the ideas, and then the resourcing will come. We have a much better chance of resourcing these ideas today because of the storm. It took advantage of us. We will now take advantage of it by building the premier city in the Panhandle. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, well, that concludes our evening. We have a lot of questions we can get to answer. Not to worry, we took down all of them, all that we can, as we can. We'll answer via the website and the questions that were asked and the answers we gave. As we were all furiously typing, will make their way onto rebuildpc.org. See you next time.